We're talking New York Giants today, little NFC East. Could the Giants finally be making their moves in the division? What's going on with Daniel Jones, and how about that defense in 2024? Coming up on today's Peacock and Williamson.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock here. Matt Williamson not here. For those of you on YouTube already probably recognized that it is Patricia Traina with me today, one of my favorite people to chat as we do every offseason, getting ready for training camp here in the NFL season in 2024, getting to know the 2024 version of the New York Giants a little bit better. Going to be chatting a lot with Patricia about that team, that division. Momentarily, I do want to remind everybody that today's episode of Peacock and Williamson brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms apply. You can find me on Twitter at BD Peacock and Patricia at Patricia_Traina. Patricia, how you doing? How's your offseason going?
Went by fast, Brian. I mean, here we are. Training camps are starting up already. Football is coming back, and I'm ready to roll.
They creeped them up a week on us, didn't they?
Yeah, something like that.
Feels like training camp got going a little bit earlier this year. I feel like the NFL season is just, at some point, it's going to be like a 30-game schedule. It's going to be a 12-month league.
Oh, gosh. But, you know, maybe they changed the off-season program to where we start training camp at the beginning of July. Can you imagine?
Yeah. Oh, man, that would be pretty wild. I hope they don't change it too much, because I like
especially to get this heat.
I like a little bit of the OTAs in the spring post-draft.
Yeah, the weather's better. Yeah, definitely.
I like that situation a lot. It's been interesting for the New York Giants, not only because of the draft and the offseason, which I want to talk about, but the hard knock stuff as well. Is there anything that's really blown you away that maybe you didn't quite know about how some of the inner workings went with the New York Giants from watching them on Hard Knocks and getting a little bit more information? I know you're really plugged in. It's probably hard to surprise you with anything that the team is doing these days, Patricia.
Yeah, I mean, I've found it interesting to see some of the backstories to what we have been reporting. You know, the Saquon Barkley situation. They really, you know, despite the fact that they aired the conversation with Saquon Barkley. Oh, by the way, spoiler alerts for anybody who hasn't seen it. Right. They've aired the conversation with Barkley and his agent. Kind of, you know, I think the next episode is going to reveal the outcome, which we all know what the outcome is, but what was said as part of the outcome. I think it's, you know, I've been reporting that it was a matter of semantics. If Barkley's saying, oh, I never got an offer, but the agent had to have had some idea what the Giants ballpark was. Mm-hmm. So maybe Barkley didn't get a formal offer, but maybe, you know, they knew the ballpark that the Giants were willing to be in. So, you know, that was obviously, you know, something of interest, you know, as was the fact that I keep taking away the fact that I think Joe Schoen was spurned a little bit by the fact that they couldn't get something done with Barkley. I found the scouting reports on the quarterbacks and wide receivers in the draft class. I found that to be interesting because you can kind of tell how that was setting it up for the actual draft and what happened. But so far, has anything come up that has where I've said, oh my God, I didn't know that? Other than for the conversations and the behind the scenes stuff, no. I mean, everything kind of went how I thought it would. And, you know, right down to the interest in Christian Wilkins when he was with the Miami Dolphins. I had reported that was a possibility, and, you know, and it turns out it was.
Yeah, I remember you reporting that. Do you think did it feel like the New York Giants kind of botched the Saquon Barkley thing? There was one quote that really stood out to me. And well, there was a couple. One was when Joe Schoen was talking about the market for Saquon Barkley, and he was like, he's probably not going to get a big money right away, you know, when free agency opens, or, you know, paraphrasing what he was getting at. And then when he was talking about Daniel Jones, and it's like, we're not paying a quarterback $40 million to hand off to somebody all the time. And I was thinking, well, maybe you shouldn't have paid your quarterback $40 million. So the Barkley versus Jones situation over the last couple of years, and who gets franchised, who gets signed, and then Saquon leaving not only the Giants, but to the Philadelphia Eagles, the hated Philadelphia Eagles. Is there a feeling that maybe they botched some of this?
I don't know if botched is the right word. I think, look, Joe Shane, and we saw this kind of in some previews for the next episode, talked about, Saquon, hey, what's important to you? Do you want to stick around here, and for another couple of years, make sure your name gets up there on the Ring of Honor? Is your legacy that important to you? Or is signing somewhere for an extra $1 million in guaranteed money more important to you? Well, if you look at the contract that he signed, guess what? He got an extra $1 million in guaranteed money on top of what the Giants offered him. So at the end of the day, what was more important? The money. Money is, there's an old saying, money doesn't talk, it screams. So that being said, I did get the sense that Shane was kind of bitter that the deal, that they weren't able to get something done with Saquon back in 2023. There were different circumstances. He had a different agent. He brought on, Ed Berry, his current agent, late in the process, and they did a modified, deal. But in retrospect, thinking back and looking back over the time Saquon spoke, there was that era of, like almost like he was distancing himself from the Giants a little bit. He's like, look, I'm here for my teammates, and just whenever the topic came up of his contract, it was like, yeah, I'm just here for my teammates, and we'll just see what happens. And, I'd like to be a Giant for life, but the way he said it now in retrospect, I think he started to believe that it wasn't going to happen.
Interesting. When it comes to Daniel Jones, and I saw an interesting stat that blew me away. I believe it was from Warren Sharp. Yeah, here, let me. I want to get the numbers exactly right. Sacks allowed last year. And I know that some people say that sacks are actually a quarterback stat more than an offensive line stat. And I know offensive line was something that the Giants were trying to improve this offseason, but 85 sacks last year allowed by the New York Giants, 20 more than the next closest team. You got Washington and Carolina at 65, and then Tennessee and New York Jets at 64. And spoiler alert, seasons didn't go well for any of those teams, but I mean, it could not be further away from even bad teams for how far beyond bad the New York Giants were at protecting their quarterback. Is that on the line? Is that on Daniel Jones? And has any of that been cleaned up this offseason?
I think it's on both, to be honest with you, because look, if the quarterback's holding on to the ball for more than 2.5 seconds, how long do you exactly expect your offensive lineman to hold their block? You look at the average time to throw, and I don't have those numbers in front of me, but they were over 2.5 seconds. I think, in some cases, I think some of the quarterbacks on the Giants were averaging close to 3 seconds to throw. That's a long time. I mean, it might not seem like a long time to you and me, but for an offensive lineman, that's a long time. So some of those sacks are definitely on the quarterbacks. You go back, and I think Pro Football Focus has a stat. And if I remember correctly, and I don't know the number, but I remember looking this up, Daniel Jones led the 3 quarterbacks in sacks that were, or pressures, I should say, that were directly related to him holding on to the ball. And that boils down to, look, are you looking at your second read, your third read? Are you going through your progressions? Or are you just saying, oh my God, my first read's covered. Now what do I do? So to a degree, yes, it's on the quarterbacks. But that being said, no, the offensive line wasn't very good last year. Andrew Thomas got hurt week 1. Evan Neal still, God only knows what they have in him. I don't think they know for sure if he's going to work out or not. The interior of the offensive line was an absolute mess. There was a statistic that I saw that was based on Pro Football data that the Giants' interior offensive line gave up the most sacks and pressures out of all the teams, which is wild if you think about it. So, they've revamped the guards. They brought in John Runyan Jr., who's going to play right guard, Jermaine Illuminor at left guard. The hope is that Runyan next to Evan Neal will help him. Obviously, Illuminor next to Andrew Thomas, that should work. And then you got John Michael Schmitz in the center, who, he wasn't bad last year, but he wasn't consistent. And there were things in his game that he needed to clean up. And it couldn't have helped having, a rotation of different guys next to him every week. That couldn't have helped him at all. So it was a perfect storm. The injuries were a problem. But also, excuse me, you can also make a case that the coaching was a problem. And this was something that I was screaming about last year. I said, look, they've got all these young guys, premium draft picks, Joshua Zudu, a 3rd-round pick, Marcus McKathan, who I think was a 6th-round pick, Evan Neal, 1st-round pick, and they're not developing. And when it's one guy that's not developing, you say, okay, maybe it's the guy. But when you got 3 guys that aren't developing and you see the offensive line can't pick up a stunt in week 17, week 18, you got to look at the coaching. And apparently Brian Daboll agreed because he made a switch at that position.
Oh, that's interesting and not really an angle I thought about. But when you start to look at, okay, if these young players, 2022 draft pick, 2023 draft pick, over and over start coming in, not developing as expected, do you start pointing to them all being just bad picks? Or is it that the coaching staff isn't getting these players where they need to be? That's fascinating. And speaking of draft picks, we got to talk about the 2024 draft, Malik Neighbors, and that defensive side of the ball of the New York Giants. Can they help carry that team to more victories in 2024? Next with our guest, Locked On Giants host, Patricia Traina. Today's episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by BetterHelp Online Therapy. Comparison is the thief of joy, and it's easy to envy other people's lives. And it might look like even that everybody else seems to have it all together on their social media, on their feeds, wherever you see those. And in reality, you know what? They probably don't. And therapy can help you focus on what you want instead of what others have, so you can start living your best life. It is so important. And so if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire. You get matched to a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time if you'd like at no additional charge. So stop comparing and start focusing. Get that check-in every week with the therapist. Make sure you're hitting the goals you want to hit in your life to get where you want to go with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. All right, here we go. Continuing on with Patricia Traina, the host of Locked On Giants, talking about the 2024 version of the New York Giants, and maybe get a quick prediction here at the end of where they will finish in the NFC East. Could they fight for the crown? It's a tough division over there in the NFC East. Okay, finishing up the offensive side of the ball, we talked a little bit offensive line. You hope some veteran guards. Year 2 bump in the center. Year 3 bump for Evan Neal at right tackle can help fix some of those things up, and that'll obviously help out the quarterback. But you got to get better pass catchers as well. Was Malik Neighbors their guy the whole time? Do you think that was the plan? It's like, let's stick at 5. If for some reason Marvin Harrison Jr. falls, we're going to get him. If not, it's Malik Neighbors. We need to be more dynamic on the outside on offense, especially with no Saquon Barkley anymore.
Yeah, I mean, if you watch Hard Knocks, it's becoming more and more evidence that Brian Daboll fell in love with Malik Neighbors. I think it came down to Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors. After they learned that they weren't going to trade up with New England for to get a quarterback, so they pivoted obviously, and they said, okay, well, we can't get a quarterback. We could trade down, but then maybe we'll miss out on one of these receivers. So let's just sit tight and let's take one of these receivers. But you got the impression from Hard Knocks that Brian Daboll really, really, really loved Malik Neighbors. And, you can't go wrong, I think, with either pick. I mean, both Odunze and Neighbors, very good players. It was just a matter of, okay, what role does Brian Daboll have in mind for Neighbors? And, how did Neighbors fit into that role versus how might have Odunze had fit into that role. And at the end of the day, he decided to roll with Neighbors. And, worth noting here, Brian Daboll is probably going to take over the play calling. He hasn't announced it yet, but it's pretty much that's the direction it's trending in. So Daboll will probably be the play caller for the Giants. And, so he's going to have a little bit more, even more of a voice when it comes to that type of decision. And, they picked up Neighbors, and he's an explosive yards after the catch type of guy, a guy you can move around. And it's going to be very interesting to see how they deploy him in this offense, if they have a specific role for him or if they just open up the floodgates and just, pull a surprise on people.
Yeah. If you're Brian Daboll, I can see that too, because if you feel like the seat's going to start getting warm for you, you want to go out swinging with your own play calls and not let your job be in the hands of somebody else. So I could absolutely see why Brian Daboll would say, you know what, let's let me take charge of this. I'm going to call the plays. And if this goes poorly, it's going to be on me. And I want to have the most say possible in all of this. Which quarterback was it that they wanted to go up and get if they could have?
It was Drake May. I mean, they didn't reveal that on Hard Knocks, but it was pretty obvious it was Drake May. I mean, you look at the episode and the scouts and talking about the quarterbacks, Drake May got the most glowing review. You watched the quarterbacks during their interview with the Giants. They had Caleb Williams, they had Jaden Daniels in there, they had Drake May in there, they had JJ McCarthy. You could tell Dable was impressed by Drake May. And I don't remember who said it in the episode, but somebody made a comment about how Drake May is kind of like Daniel Jones, but with a little looser personality. And, they like the qualities that Daniel Jones brings to the game. So it kind of made sense that it all fell together the way that it did.
So big time additions. You got Brian Burns on the defensive side of the ball now, bringing pressure on the outside. You've got a young developing player in Kayvon Thibodeaux coming into his own and potentially entering a prime of his career as a young pass rusher. Dexter Lawrence in the middle of the defensive line. Can the pass rush and can that defensive front for the New York Giants carry this team and help them win a bunch of games this year? Like, instead of losing games by 3, winning some games by 3.
They're going to have to. I mean, the Giants have a very young defensive secondary. So even though Shane Bowen said, oh, we'll blitz if we have to, you're not going to see him blitzing like crazy and living and dying by the blitz like Wink Martindale did. You start doing that, you're going to expose that youth in that defensive secondary, which is right now still a concern as far as I'm concerned. I don't know if the coaches feel that way, but it is still a concern. But as far as the pass rush goes, look, how many times did we see in Giant games where they just barely missed getting to the quarterback, or the quarterback got out of trouble by moving around? Now they want to make sure that, that doesn't happen. And if you go back and you look at some of the better Giant defenses this century, 2007, 2011, I keep pointing to those two teams. They were at least 3 deep in pass rushers. All right. The Giants the last few years haven't been 3 deep in the edge rusher department. I want to say you'd have to go back to when they had JPP, Jason Pierre-Paul, and Olivier Vernon. And then I forget who the other, who else was on that team, but they were 3 deep then, and they were able to get to the playoffs. So you need to be at least 3 deep. This year, you have Thibodeaux, you have Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence can be a pass rusher. If they can keep Azeez Ojulari healthy, he can rush the passer. What do they have in Tamon Fox? Can he, maybe apply some pressure? So they have guys. They just need to keep them healthy. And, Shane Bowen is all about getting home with the front 7. So that should help, like I said, the back end of the defense.
I mean, it's so important. If I was, gifted an NFL franchise and they said, Brian Peacock, how are you going to, what's your mission statement? How are you going to develop a roster in the NFL? Quarterback aside, obviously that's the number one thing you need. It would be defensive line. It would be pass rush. You have to hassle the opponent's quarterback as well. And it makes things so much easier on the rest of your defense. And you can win a lot of games that way with a really dominant defensive line. And yeah, it's a good point about those defensive lines of the past. The glory years from the New York Giants and what was the NASCAR package, right? Weren't they the originators of throwing 4 defensive ends out there on the field? And so, get back to those days if you're the New York Giants and maybe find yourself some success. Before I let you go, Patricia, I got to get some predictions here. How do you think this New York Giants team is going to do? Are they going to turn a corner? And can they make some noise in the NFC East this year?
I'm not sure they're going to win the NFC East. I don't know that they're there yet. There's still some question marks that need to be answered as far as I'm concerned in training camp. Where's Daniel Jones in his rehab? Is he going to be ready? And if he is ready, is he going to be better than what he was last year when he looked all too often like a deer caught in the headlights? How are they going to adjust for the loss of Saquon Barkley? Because that is a big loss. And, you can say, oh, well, they got Malik Neighbors, but, they also lost Darren Waller, who, although he was injured, Darren Waller, when he was on the field, was a passing threat. So there's going to be a shift, I think, in the offensive philosophy and how they distribute those snaps and everything like that. So I do think, though, that the Giants will be better if they stay healthy. Could they maybe be a wild card team? I think they can push for that, but I still think that there are some questions they need to answer before I feel comfortable saying, oh yeah, they're going to challenge for the division.
Yeah, too many questions over the last few years with New York, and can they start finding some answers there? And that'll be pretty telling on how this 2024 season is going to go. Thank you so much, Patricia. Appreciate you coming on and talking New York Giants. It's always a pleasure chatting with you every offseason as we get ready for training camp 2024. And you guys can all find Patricia every day, Locked On Giants, at Patricia_Traina, and have fun camping this year, Patricia.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Thanks again to Patricia Traina of Locked On Giants. Next, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into some what ifs with the New York Giants, because Patricia said something really interesting about Drake May potentially being the guy they wanted and how things could have gone the past couple of off seasons if they would have maybe gone all in on Saquon Barkley rather than Daniel Jones, maybe flipped the long-term contract and the franchise tag from Jones and Saquon Barkley, how that might have looked this offseason, what that team would be like, and compare the two rosters. And of course, can they actually go make the playoffs and make some noise in the NFC East for those New York Giants in 2024 next? This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by Game Time. Special offer for our listeners, getting tickets for any sporting event, any concert, any comedy show, theater event near you, because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. And it makes getting tickets faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So whether you want to go catch a ball game, maybe you got an NFL game scheduled on the calendar that you want to go hit, killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes all the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets, NFL tickets, comedy tickets, concert tickets, and a whole lot more. Love seeing the view from your seat on the app, panoramic style. You know exactly what all the views look like from your seat before you buy, and no surprise fees at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So let's go back to the 2023 offseason when the New York Giants franchise tagged Saquon Barkley and did a kind of medium term, wasn't quite a long-term deal, wasn't quite a short-term deal, although that deal could end pretty abruptly, I think, after this season for Daniel Jones. And, you know, we've talked in depth on this show about how I thought it was a terrible idea, paying Daniel Jones $40 million and all that. And we'll see how that all ends for the New York Giants. I also don't love that they didn't bring any kind of competition in. I mean, Drew Lock is a backup, and I don't think he's going to push Daniel Jones, and I don't think he's any kind of answer if you see early in the season that Daniel Jones falls on his face or something like that. So I would have liked just more options at quarterback, something that could have potentially been like, oh, wow, we've got this surprise thing maybe, and we actually had another opportunity, another avenue to get this right at quarterback before you get fired, right? If you're Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll, because that's one of the ways this could go if things don't go as optimistically as, you know, Patricia laid out as a team that could potentially go make the playoffs and maybe their defense carrying them there. Because I don't have a lot of expectations for the offense. But let's say the New York Giants, and by the way, I think the Giants, and clearly judging by how they operated in 2023, and then seeing the behind the scenes stuff with Hard Knocks, they clearly didn't see the kind of the mini rebound for running backs this offseason coming. And they're still not getting big money compared to other positions in the NFL, but the position didn't continue to drop. There was a little bit more money there for especially top running backs in the NFL. And you know, look, I always say it, I'm the chairman of the West Coast chapter of Running Backs Don't Matter, but there are some running backs that matter a little bit more than others, even if they don't matter like a pass rusher or a wide receiver or a quarterback or an offensive lineman does in the NFL. A great running back can do a lot for your offense, especially if they're able to stay healthy. And when Saquon's healthy, he's he was the catalyst to that New York Giants offense. You know, we've seen what it's been like for Christian McCaffrey in San Francisco. Some running backs is really nice to have on your team, and they are an upgrade over your average replacement running back. And Saquon's one of those guys. So what if the Giants did that medium-term contract with Saquon Barkley, and he's under contract right now, and they franchise tagged or just didn't sign at all Daniel Jones, and he would have been gone and a free agent this offseason? What would that have looked like? Because not only do you have Saquon and a quarterback, would they have tried harder? Would they have been able to get up to get Drake May? Maybe not. Probably not. J.J. McCarthy. Do you trade down potentially in the draft and still end up with somebody like Odunze, or Neighbors is still there, or J.J. McCarthy there? So I'm going to say they stick at, let's just say they stick at 5, right? And everything goes the same last year. Daniel Jones moves on. You still have Saquon Barkley under contract. You draft J.J. McCarthy with the 5th pick, and that's with no other trades to potentially get. But you have another $25 million, right? In that scenario of paying Saquon and not Daniel Jones. Well, that $25 million could get you that tier of wide receiver, like, say, a T. Higgins. You want to throw a 2nd-round pick at the Bengals and go get T. Higgins. Maybe you can swing a deal to go get Brandon Ayuk or someone like that and pay a wide receiver $25-30 million that's ready to play now for whatever your quarterback is, a young quarterback, maybe a reclamation quarterback. Is Daniel Jones that much better than I don't know, whatever name a stopgap quarterback right now in the short term while you try to figure out that quarterback? And I would argue, I don't think it would be worse if you had Sam Darnold at quarterback in 2024 and maybe a rookie behind him like the Minnesota Vikings do in J.J. McCarthy. Let's use that as a template for the New York Giants. What if they signed a short-term deal with Sam Darnold, and then you have J.J. McCarthy as your long-term potential answer? I think there'd be a lot more optimism about the New York Giants and what that could potentially be short and long-term. And, you know, go find a wide receiver, go pay a wide receiver in free agency, go trade for a guy. You have more cash long-term left over to pay one of those players. So I still think that's the avenue, and that would have had to start in the 2023 offseason. That looks better to me than just Daniel Jones plus Malik Neighbors. As much as I like Malik Neighbors, I think they could have replaced, found a wide receiver to throw the ball to, plus Saquon Barkley, and potentially a much better outlook long-term at quarterback than the way they played it over the last 2 off seasons, and, you know, maybe the last 3 off seasons. I think there's been a lot of, and look, I think ownership is part of it. They believe in Daniel Jones, and I get that. And maybe Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll haven't been able to operate exactly how they would have. And if that's the case, then maybe it's not the right job for you. If you see your team differently than ownership does, because, you know, having an anchor at quarterback, which I think I can't blame the offensive line and the wide receivers and the coach. There's been too many different players around Daniel Jones and different GMs and coaching staffs around Daniel Jones. I just don't think he's the guy. I just really don't. And I would love to hear why you think he is the guy. Any New York Giants fans out there, let me know at BD Peacock. Drop a comment on YouTube. As far as the NFC East goes, obviously, if I'm not really high on your offense and your quarterback, I'm probably not going to be super high on your football team. But man, I do love what's going on in that front 7 on defense for the New York Giants. Brian Burns, Kayvon Thibodeaux, I think, is ready to potentially blow up. And I've been a big fan of Brian Burns for a long time, since he was at Florida State. You know, Dexter Lawrence on the inside, and you got those stand-up rushers on the outside. Is that enough alone? I don't know what it is, but I think it's good enough to beat a team that's rolling out a rookie quarterback that got rid of all their good pass rushers last year in the Washington Commanders. So I see at least a 3rd place finish for the New York Giants this year, depending on how quickly Jaden Daniels develops, because they still got some defensive tackles over there in Washington. So they aren't completely depleted on the defensive side of the ball. And if Jaden Daniels turns out to be the guy, then we might be talking about a 4th place finish again for the New York Giants here, because with, well, I shouldn't say again, because they finished just ahead of Washington last year. I do think Washington is going in a better direction, though, than the New York Giants. So, you know, if I could buy stock in one of the franchises right now, it would be Washington. New ownership. I think they're doing some things right. It might take some time. I don't think they're trying to fix things quickly. And I think for the New York Giants, that rebuild, especially at quarterback, should have started sooner. And now they're just going to be behind the times. And look, the Dallas Cowboys are not going anywhere. And even though those teams might start to look a little bit different in the near term, what about Dak? What about stealing Dak away from the Cowboys, by the way, if he becomes a free agent next offseason? Wouldn't that be something? We saw the Eagles steal away Saquon Barkley. How about the New York Giants stealing away Dak Prescott in the 2025 offseason? That would be fun. There's options at quarterback. You don't have to attach yourself to Daniel Jones forever, New York Giants. Might have to be a new regime, though, if they move off of Daniel Jones, depending on how tied to that quarterback this regime currently is. But I'm not ready to say the New York Giants are going to be good enough to be a playoff football team in 2024. That's just how I see it. I think it's a third or fourth place finish. I think the division's too difficult, and I think there's too many other teams that are good that are gonna clean up on those wild card spots. And the Giants, again, are going to have questions that need to be answered. And how many off seasons in a row can you have more questions than answers is now the biggest question for the New York Giants. Thanks again to Patricia Traina for joining me here on Peacock and Williamson. Matt, back with me next time. And thanks again to all the everydayers out there. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you listen to this podcast. Back next time, Peacock and Williamson.